Hello, welcome back to Light of the Logos. This is Cameron. I'd like to make a much fuller video to my recent video about Alex O'Connor and Wes Huff's comments and remarks. And I'd like to address a lot of different points. So we're going to cover a lot of ground here. First of all, when it comes to textual variants,
that is when I therefore bring up chapter 2, verse 9b and verse 10. Those verses, as you know, are missing from the Isaiah scroll. They're not in there. This is not the removal of a the. This is not the difference in a word order. This is a missing verse entirely. There are a lot of reasons other than just the fact that we have variant verses of versions of this verse to think that it's a later edition. That verse is missing. Do you think that is a significant difference, a significant variant?
Variants galore. So many variants. Okay, here's simply the Christian position, especially by those who are involved in the field of textual criticism. Christians have never been afraid of variants. We actually are okay with that. Having more variants is a byproduct of what? It's a byproduct of having more manuscripts. Now, when it comes to the New Testament, we have over 5,000, nearly 6,000 manuscripts, which is radically more than any other document from antiquity, from ancient times. And by the mere fact that there are lots of variants, it also means that there are lots of manuscripts. And when you have lots of manuscripts, you're able to compare and you're able to contrast them, and you're able to make a really good decision as to what came earlier, what was a mistake, what was added, what was taken out. You're able to decipher and weed through a lot of that and come to a relatively certain position of what was originally there. Now, let me actually just show you real quick here what I'm talking about.
The fewer manuscripts you have, the higher possibility of major emendation, editing, and corruption. The New Testament has more manuscripts than any other work of antiquity, approximately 1.3 million pages of handwritten text. So while at first glance the number of variants intimates a horribly corrupt textual tradition, this is not the case. Instead, when we recognize that the vast majority of variants are simply meaningless, they are, as noted, spelling differences, such as whether you spell John with one new or two news, and especially the concept of the movable new, the bane of the existence of the first-year Greek student and the scribe alike, it seems. The actual number of meaningful textual variants in the New Testament presents a very different picture. As we noted, the vast majority of the variants are non-meaningful. They simply cannot be translated from Greek into English or any other language for that matter. They do not impact the meaning of the text.
Again, we are not Muslims. We do not claim perfect preservation. We have never made that claim. We welcome multiple variants because that means that there are more manuscripts to work from and to look at. Why is it also important that there are lots of manuscripts to look at? Because it also means that when you have lots of manuscripts, that there was also not a centralized governing body that collected all those manuscripts at one time and was able to change them or alter them. Because if you have all the manuscripts, let's just say you end up just burning them all, which is what Uthman did with the Quran. Let's say if Christianity had something like that, we would hate that. We would hate that because then that means we can't compare it to anything else to find out what the original was. Maybe one of the ones that were burned was the original. It's like, oh, you just burned the original, you idiot. Now we've got this one that was left. Well, why was that left? Because the people in charge, the governing body that was in charge, didn't like the original ones maybe and kept this one. So now you're stuck with that one. We are not claiming what Muslims claim. We have never claimed that. If some of you agnostics and atheists are finally realizing this for the first time, I'm sorry you're now just catching up to this. Okay, going back with all the talk between Alex O'Connor, are there variants? Well, there's things that are different, like Isaiah 2:9.
Fair enough. So the question is, what about the significant readings of the text? That is when I therefore bring up chapter 2, verse 9b and verse 10. Those verses, as you know, are missing from the Isaiah scroll. They're not in there. This is not the removal of a the. This is not the difference in a word order. This is a missing verse entirely.
If we look at Isaiah 2:9, which Alex O'Connor points out, let me go ahead and look it up here. Okay, so this right here is not in the original Isaiah text, but it was in the Masoretic text. Okay, so somebody added this to the Masoretic text. Who cares? Yes, what a profound response. Who cares? This is the beauty of textual criticism. If we have older manuscripts that don't have this or say something else, then we have good reason to go with that. That's the beauty of variants. This is what needs to be explained to Alex. More variants come with the fact that you have more texts. Having more text means that you're able to compare. Being able to compare means that you're able to have a better idea of what the original was, to where then you can actually have what you need all along, which is being relatively certain. It's important to be relatively certain. Being relatively certain actually enables you to be more certain than if you just have one single manuscript, because then that means you do not have any way to know what could have ever been added or changed. Think about that for a second. That's a crazy statement, but it's a true statement. Being relatively certain enables you to be more certain than just pretending you're certain by only having one or two manuscripts. That's the claim that actually Muslims used to make. You can now actually get on YouTube and you will see even prominent Muslim apologists backing down from that now, because the beauty of the internet exposes these things. But that was always the Muslim claim. It was always that the Quran never changes. As Christians, we never made that claim. Let me go back. I want to look at Dan Wallace versus Bart Ehrman. Dan Wallace essentially says the same things.
Although the quantity of textual variants among the New Testament manuscripts numbers in the hundreds of thousands, those that change the meaning pale in comparison. Less than 1% of the differences are both meaningful and viable. There are still hundreds of texts that are in dispute. I don't want to give the impression that textual criticism is merely a mopping up job nowadays, that all but a handful of problems have been resolved. That's not the case. There are hundreds of passages whose interpretation depends to some degree on which reading is followed. Well, finally, or next to last, we ask the question, what theological beliefs depend on textually suspect passages?
So once again, I'm just briefly going over these debates. You can see them on YouTube. James White, Dan Wallace debating these things. Christians who are having scholarly debates about these things have never been shy about the fact that there are variants within the Christian text, and we explain why that's actually crucial. But this is all in contrast with what Muslims actually claim. They actually claim that there is perfect preservation of the Quran. For example, let me go and just pull up a clip right here, and we'll go ahead and look at this.
Today I'm here to defend the proposition that the Quran has been perfectly preserved. Now, what do I mean by that? What do I mean when I say that the Quran has been perfectly preserved? All I simply mean is this. If the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, were alive today and were to look at the Quran that we have, he would say that there's no chapter or verse falsely added to or missing from the Quran.
Here we have a Muslim doing a debate about whether or not the Quran has been perfectly preserved. And he said what he means by that, if Muhammad were alive today, he'd be able to tell us that there has not been a single, and he said verse, not just a passage, but there has not even been a single verse that has ever been added or taken away than what was originally there. Even prominent Muslim apologists now are backing away from this. They're being called out on this. Muslims are now backing away from this claim. But my point is that this is in complete contrast with what Christians debate. You are not going to find any Christian debates on YouTube of Christians claiming that the scriptures have been 100% perfectly preserved. You will never find that. And Wes Huff, I guarantee you, knows that. I knew that what he meant. I knew that he knew that it was not an exact word-for-word copy. Even though he used that phraseology, I knew that he knew. But I also knew that he wasn't trying to be deceptive, because I knew what he meant. This is the key word. M-E-A-N-T. I knew what he meant. Again, what he actually thought he was referring to is this right here, which is 1Q Isaiah B. So this is actually a text that is not as complete as 1Q Isaiah A. Doesn't go as far back. Right here, this is dated to around 30 BC to 68 AD, whereas the entire Isaiah scroll, 1Q Isaiah A, goes back further to 125 BC. Okay, but looking at 1Q Isaiah B, again, this is what Wes thought he was actually referring to.
We literally pushed back our understanding of Isaiah 1,000 years. And the thing that really shocked scholars, like I said, this isn't true for all of the Dead Sea Scrolls, but one of the things that shocked them about Isaiah was that it was word for word identical to the Masoretic text.
I'm just going to scroll through it. Note how many times things are green, which again, a green just means that there's a spelling difference. And note how many times things are red, which a red would indicate a variant. If there's a strike through the middle, that means that it was in the later Masoretic text of the 10th or 11th century. And if it's red and underlined, that means that it was actually in the original Dead Sea Scroll text. I'm going to go through here. I mean, wow. So far, not even any red. No red so far. Okay, still no red. Okay, here we go. In an instant was in the Masoretic text, and to open is in the Dead Sea Scroll text. Lord was in the Masoretic text. Yahweh was in the Dead Sea Scroll text. We see that happening a lot. Am oppressed was in the Masoretic text. Have desire was in the Dead Sea Scroll text. Confounded was in the Masoretic text. Put to shame was in the Dead Sea Scroll text. Okay, my versus your, my versus daughters. Okay, I will, it was in the original. And was in the earlier text. Okay, this was in the earlier text. The Lord was in the earlier text. The was not in the Masoretic text. Okay, to and upon are switched out. Go out from among her was in the Masoretic text. And lifted up was in the Masoretic text. Here and lifted up was in the earlier text. And was in the earlier text. Transgressors versus their transgressions. My, your, he, they, an S after enters. And soul versus souls. We have a bunch of ands. The word they was in the earlier text. In arms versus on the hip. To versus upon. All. Okay, here we have a whole sentence. This was in the Masoretic text. This somehow got added. And your God will be your glory. Your sun will not go down anymore, nor will your moon withdraw itself, for Yahweh will be your everlasting light. Okay, you can see here it's essentially saying the same thing in the same passage. The sun will no more light your day, nor will the brightness of the moon give you light, but Yahweh will be your everlasting light. So it's really just like added here, repeating the same thing but rephrasing it. Him versus yourselves until he establishes. His versus the, and by the arm was in the Masoretic text. Want to help versus man, Yahweh. Okay, and that's pretty much it, you guys. So this is remarkable. There's nothing that's significant in terms of changing the entire meaning of a passage. Absolutely nothing significant in terms of changing any core doctrines or theology. Absolutely not. But there's virtually hardly any differences. And this is between documents that are 1,000 years apart. That's amazing. This is incredible. Okay, so now I want to actually move on and look at 1Q Isaiah A. And I want to look at some doctrines to point to. Isaiah 6:1. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on the throne high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. All right, here we have the earliest Isaiah scroll, 1Q Isaiah A. No textual variants in this passage. What's so significant about this passage? As I've talked about in my previous videos, we see something very unique about Christianity than all the other religions of the world. Just as Dr. Peter Jones stated, everything can ultimately be broken down into two worldviews, oneism and twoism. Oneism is every worldview, essentially. Atheism, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, Unitarianism, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, everything is ultimately a oneist system. It's an overemphasis of the oneness of things. Everything ultimately terminates in that. With Christianity, on the other hand, we have twoism, to where there is a creator-creation distinction. There's the eternal creator, and then there's his finite creation. With this, you have distinction. And within the triune God of Scripture, you also have distinction. This goes all the way back to understanding the fact that we always see Adonai to hold two radically different views that seemingly contradict each other, but they're ultimately paradox. Just as in Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth. But then what do we also see a little bit later? In Genesis 3:8, we see Adonai walks in the garden with his people. He enters into creation and interacts with them. Adonai, who is eternal, enters into finite time and space and interacts with his finite creation. We also see that in the case with Isaiah. In one sense, God, Adonai, is said to be invisible. What do we also see, though? Isaiah speaking, I saw the Lord. I saw Adonai sitting on a throne. So the God who cannot be seen is also the God who has a person within himself, enables the unseeable God to be seen. This is why we are Trinitarians, because we see this repeatedly throughout the Tanakh. We see that God is both preeminent beyond us and eminent, interacting and existing within finite time and space to interact with his own creation. One of my favorite passages. Let's go to Isaiah 7:14. Okay, here we have a textual variant that is not a meaningful textual variant. Instead of it saying the Lord, which the Masoretic text says, it says Yahweh or Adonai. Therefore, Adonai himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin will conceive. Behold, the virgin will conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. And again, how does the LXX, how does the Septuagint interpret this Hebrew word here of Emmanuel? It interprets it as the God with us. It is not a Christian invention. Emmanuel was translated by the Greek translators as the God with us, just as it is in Matthew 1:23. In the Greek, it is also translated as the God with us, which is referring to Christ. Let's go to Isaiah 9:6. Again, no variance and no meaningful variance. For to us a child is born, to us a child is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. His name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and the peace there shall be no end on David's throne and on his kingdom, to establish it and uphold it with justice and with righteousness from that time on, even forever. This is a messianic passage. How do we know that? It is speaking of one who comes from David, is going to sit on David's throne, but he is going to be greater than David. Not only is he so great that he is going to be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace, but he is going to bring about a kingdom of righteousness and justice. And how long is that kingdom going to last? It says it is going to last forever. It is going to be an eternal kingdom because it lasts forever. That is how we know it is a messianic passage, because those types of things are only believed and taught about who the Messiah will be. All right, moving on. Isaiah 27:6. I love scrolling through this. I love the fact that this thing is just so long. All of this was cherished by the ancient Jews. It should also be cherished by us as well. Oh, look, no textual variants. In days to come, Jacob will take root, Israel will blossom and bud. They will fill the surface of the world with fruit. What is this speaking of? This means that salvation will come through Israel to the rest of the world. Who did that come through? Did it come through the Messiah? Who is the Messiah? Is the Lord Jesus Christ the Messiah? Did the Lord Jesus Christ fulfill this? Did salvation come through Christ the Messiah to the rest of the world? What has been taking place in the last 2,000 years since the temple's been destroyed? Has the gospel gone out to every nation, to every people? We see that this is something foretold of in ancient times, going back hundreds of years prior to Christianity, something that the ancient Jews always believed. And we live in a time where we are living 2,000 years after Christ, and we have seen this prophecy profoundly come true. We have seen God's kingdom profoundly grow from 12 disciples after the resurrection, planting churches, the Roman Empire being taken over by Christianity, God's church growing, the kingdom expanding, and you even have atheists and agnostics like Alex O'Connor on YouTube spending all their time talking about Christianity, all their time and energy put into talking about Christianity. That's how amazing it is. That's how impactful it is. This came true. Let's go to Isaiah 44:24. No textual variants. This speaks of Adonai's eternality. Not only does Genesis 1:1, in the beginning Elohim created the heavens and the earth, not only does that speak of Adonai's being eternal and creating everything that is finite. Again, twoism, creator, creation distinction, which only Christianity consistently holds to. This is why the theory of the Big Bang was originally mocked. Yes, you may not have known that, Mr. Atheist, Mr. Agnostic. Fred Hoyle was an atheist in the mid-20th century, and he's the one who coined the term Big Bang. He probably made fun of it with a British accent, like, some Big Bang, just all of a sudden it just comes out of nothing, just some Big Bang. Why? Because he was a British atheist, and he believed the common atheistic belief back then, which was that the universe was eternal. It was not believed to have had a starting point, because that's what the Jews believed, because that's what the Christians believed, based on the Tanakh, based on the New Testament. It's always been a Jewish and Christian belief that God created the heavens and the earth, that God created all that is finite. Twoism. creator Christian distinction. Again, the phrase Big Bang was originally a pejorative. It was originally making fun of the idea of twoism. It was originally making fun of the idea of there being a creator creation distinction. It was originally a pejorative of there being a creator creation distinction. It was originally a pejorative of the God of the Tanakh, Adonai. So anyways, it says, Yahweh or Adonai, your Redeemer, he who formed you from the womb says, I am Yahweh or Adonai, who makes all things, who alone stretches out the heavens, who spreads out the earth by myself. It says that Adonai alone does these things. Okay, now let's also go to Isaiah 43:10. All right, we see a textual variant, but it's one that is not meaningful. The Masoretic text says, will there be? While the earlier text says, is there? All right, so what does this verse say? Isaiah 43:10. This is quoted all the time with Mormons. Before me, there was no God formed, neither is there after me. I myself am Adonai, and besides me, there is no Savior. Again, key passage, no textual variants in the earliest text of Isaiah. What's also significant about pointing this out, this guy right here that Alex O'Connor brings on for scholarly assistance.
Their own description of what they were doing with the list of textual variants.
All right, so this guy right here is a Mormon.
The Dead Sea Scrolls, if you just want them to be evidence that the Bible hasn't changed, you lose.
Why is he not applying the same critical standards towards the Book of Mormon as he is towards the scriptural text? Anyways, if this gentleman here is a Mormon, then he is part of the Restoration Cult of Mormonism, which bases its foundation on the Old Testament and the New Testament. You do not have Mormonism without those things being true, because it's claiming to restore those things. And it's claiming to harmonize with those things as well. So it borrows from it, but then it claims to restore it. You can point out to Mormons, you can show them Isaiah, and you can even now point them back to the Isaiah scroll itself in Isaiah 43, verse 10, that there are no textual variants, or at least no meaningful textual variants. It says, before me, there was no God formed, neither is there after me. Christian counterfeits, such as Mormonism, believing that God is finite, or that there is an infinite succession of gods in eternity past. What Joseph Smith taught, in particular, on the King Follett Discourse, where he says that we have imagined and supposed that God was God from all eternity. I will refute that idea. I will refute that idea. Refute what idea? That God was God from all eternity. And then he says, and I will take away the veil so that you may see. Okay, but that's not what Isaiah says. Even going back to the great Isaiah scroll, the earliest text we have of Isaiah, Isaiah 43:10, before me there was no God formed, neither is there after me. If this verse is true in Isaiah 43:10, then Mormonism is false. Which means that this gentleman here, speaking with Alex O'Connor, his Mormon worldview is false if the Isaiah scroll's teaching is true. All right, now I want to look at one more passage here, which is Isaiah 53. And this one is huge. Let's go to Isaiah 53. Hardly any textual variants with this passage. The only textual variant is that we have and a rich man is replaced with rich people. The only textual variant, if this website is accurate. I'll go and read it here. Isaiah 53. All right. Who has believed our message? To whom has the arm of Adonai been revealed? For he grew up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of dry ground. He has no good looks or majesty. When we see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, and a man of suffering, and acquainted with disease. He was despised as one whom men hide their face, and we didn't respect him. Surely he has borne our sickness and carried our suffering, yet we considered him plagued, struck by God, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, and he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought our peace was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray, everyone has turned to his own way, and Adonai has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed, and he was afflicted, and he didn't open his mouth. As a lamb he was led to the slaughter, and as sheep that go before its shears is silent, so he didn't open his mouth. He was taken away by oppression and judgment, And as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off out of the land of the living, and for the disobedience of my people, they made his grave with the wicked and with rich people in his death. Although he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth, yet it pleased Adonai to bruise him, or to crush him. He has caused him to suffer. When you make his soul an offering for sin, he will see his offering. He will prolong his days. That means that the suffering servant, his days will be prolonged. This is language of resurrection. He will prolong his days, and Adonai's pleasure will prosper in his hand. After the suffering of his soul, he will see the light and be satisfied. My righteous servant will justify many by the knowledge of himself, and he will bear their iniquities. Therefore, I will give him a portion with the great, and he will divide the plunder with the strong, because he poured out his soul to death and was counted with the transgressors, yet he bore the sins of many and made intercession for their transgressions. Who could this be referring to? Who comes to your mind naturally? Let's watch a video real quick here. Let's watch a few clips of how Jews themselves in Israel react when Isaiah 53 is read.
Transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities.
Punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed.
By his wounds we are healed. So where is this from? The Old Testament or the New Testament?
I'm going to say the other one because it doesn't sound like the Tanakh.
ברית החדשה, New Testament.
ברית חדשה.
זה ברית חדשה.
New Testament.
Old Testament.
תנ"ך.
Tanakh. Why do you think that's from the New Testament?
It sounded like they were talking about Jesus.
פה אני חשבתי שזה מדבר על מריה ועל ישו ועל כל זה.
I don't know why, it's a feeling. I can't say why.
It's from the Old Testament.
Although I knew it was a trick.
It's not trick, I'm telling you, it's so similar. People think that it's like a Western religion and it has nothing to do with Judaism, but this is so close to Judaism, it's crazy.
So the next one, you ready?
This is Isaiah 53. If this website is correct, there's no meaningful textual variance in this passage from the Isaiah scroll. So Alex O'Connor is going this way, wasting all of his time and energy about looking at Isaiah 2:9. If Isaiah 2:9 is not in the earlier text, that's okay. We don't need it. We're going to go off of what is earlier. That's part of the process. That's part of textual criticism that scholars look at. Okay, so when you're done going off on all these ridiculous tangents about whether or not Wes Huff was precise and pedantic enough with his language, I hope that you turn around and go this direction and spend at least 5 minutes, hopefully longer, looking at things like Isaiah 53, which is clearly a messianic text. And it cannot be argued that this was not somehow original, because this goes back as far as we can. And from what I'm seeing here, there's virtually no textual variants, especially no meaningful ones. All right, so I want to now finish on this point, which is that we see a lot of fake skepticism taking place. What is fake skepticism? Fake skepticism is when you have an unfounded bias against Christianity that you do not equally apply towards anything else. That's an unfounded bias, not just a bias. Biases aren't a big deal. We should have biases, but it's an unfounded bias. It's a bias, it's irrational. And I would like to know by what basis Alex O'Connell accounts and justifies for his logic and his rationality in the first place. Because he uses rationality and logic, he's borrowing it from something, he's getting it from somewhere. Well, where's he getting it from? Where's he borrowing it from? How does his worldview account for those things? How does Alex O'Connor's worldview account for life, logic, morality, interdependency, DNA code, all of these things? How does his worldview account for those things? And I want him to answer me, and I want to scrutinize it. I want to scrutinize his answers. I want him to answer how he accounts for it, and I want to be skeptical of his answers. I want to put his answers under a microscope and see if they actually hold water. I want to put his answers under a microscope and see if they're consistent. And until that happens, all him and people like him are doing is giving themselves a grand free pass, which is neo-Hinduism, of believing that all these things can self-create. All of these things can just come about on their own. Life can come about on its own. Logic can come about on its own. Morality can come about on its own. Intelligence can come about on its own. Interdependency can come about on its own. DNA coding can come about on its own. You give yourself the grand free pass You get to freely hold to a worldview of the positive claims that all of these things can self-create and come about on their own. You get to hold to that worldview, but then hide behind the tree and call yourself an agnostic, and then go run and hide by calling yourself an atheist. It's like being a 5-year-old playing tag, and everyone else has to tag each other and give an account for their worldviews, give an account for their beliefs, and have their beliefs and have their worldviews scrutinized, and have their worldviews and ideas and beliefs critiqued. Can't tag me, I'm on base. Can't tag me, I call myself an atheist. Can't tag me, I call myself an agnostic. I get to grant myself all of this existence. I get to just grant myself that it can just all self-create. This is hiding, and hiding is fake skepticism. And the fact that they're fake skeptics needs to be pointed out. And the fact that they have an unfounded bias needs to be pointed out. And the fact that they're not skeptical of their own skepticism needs to be pointed out. Where is Alex O'Connor to our rescue when it comes to disproving this? Where is his time, energy when it comes to disproving John Marco Allegro's absurd claims of John Marco Allegro's The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross? Where is he when it comes to this? There's been people on Joe Rogan's podcast who have went along with this, who have entertained these ideas, who have entertained this book. Joe Rogan has entertained this book. Joe Rogan has gotten extremely excited about this book. Where was Alex O'Connor when it came to this? Nowhere. Where was Alex O'Connor? Was he calling up his scholarly friends, getting them on the line and asking their opinions on this? No. Was anybody else calling up their scholarly friends and getting them on the line and making YouTube videos to debunk this? No. Who finally came along and debunked this? Wes Huff. Is Joe Rogan going to continue to talk about John Marco Allegro's book, The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross? Is he going to talk about it any longer? I doubt it. Joe Rogan has been watching. He even said that he's been watching about 10 hours of Wes Huff's content. And I'm sure he came across this video, and I'm sure when he watched this video, it silenced him and made him realize, okay, I'm not going to talk about this any longer. I didn't know what I was talking about. And when Wes Huff was on Joe Rogan's podcast, he even brought it up.
Actually, this relates because I know you're a Marco Allegro guy. The first time I was introduced to Marco Allegro was not his Sacred Mushroom and the Cross stuff, but he published a book on what's called the Copper Scroll, because part of the Dead Sea Scroll fragments is this inscribed document on copper, which is an ancient treasure map.
Can you see it? Is
Yeah.
it online?
Yeah, Jamie, pull up the, hey.
There it is. Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. Anytime anyone's ever brought up John Marco Allegro's book on Joe Rogan's podcast, Joe Rogan lights up as he gets really close into the mic and starts sniffing. What do you think about this book? It's entirely possible that this could have happened. He didn't do that. When Wes brought it up, the one time someone brought it up on the show who actually knows about this field, he didn't talk about it. Why? Well, probably because he watched this video. Let's go ahead and play it here.
John Marco Allegro wrote a book called The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
He has one claim that the word Christ can be traced, how do you say it?
Etymologically.
Etymologically.
Yeah.
To an ancient Sumerian word.
Mm-hmm.
Sumerian was the language of ancient Sumer. It is one of, if not the oldest languages known to humanity. Sumerian is a language isolate, meaning that it has no demonstrable genetic relationship with any other language. Christ is the Greek word meaning anointed one. In Jewish or Christian context, it's translated from the Hebrew Mashiach, Messiah, which also means anointed one. The words mushroom, covered are nowhere to be found for either Christ or Messiah etymologically. Ancient Greek had no direct contact with Sumerian, either geographically or linguistically. Hebrew had...
All right, anyways, the point being, when you have people making wacky claims and no one cares, no agnostics, no atheists care, this is fake skepticism. We've looked at the Isaiah scroll in this video. We looked at some of my favorite, and I would love to know what are your favorite passages in Isaiah. In the comment section below, please tell me your favorite passages in Isaiah. We see that the Tanakh presents a completely different nature and view of God than what modern Christian counterfeits give us about their false gods, such as with Jehovah's Witness, Unitarianism, and Mormonism, and Islam. You can see just the life that comes out of Isaiah 53. Israelis today, initial reaction is to see Christ in it. They believe that it's referring to Christ. Why is that? Because it is. Thank you guys for watching this video, and please like, share, subscribe. My content help grow my channel and help share this. Please leave me a comment. Take care. I'll see you on the next one.